Welcome back, everybody, to Untangled. Today's guest is Leo Hoar. He is the UX Research Manager at Beam Benefits, where he's built and scaled a versatile research practice that supports product, design, sales, and marketing. Over his last 6 years at Beam, Leo has introduced programs like company-wide rolling research initiative, giving anyone the ability to quickly test ideas with customers, and a behavioral design discipline that applies behavioral science to encourage positive user actions. Before leading research at Beam, Leo worked at Samsung Mobile, where he combined UX research and writing to improve experiences for health apps and wearables. He also has deep roots in design research consulting, higher education program design at Ohio State, and even grant development at the College of Mount St. Vincent. Across these roles, Leo has been a builder of systems, teams, and opportunities, creating structures that let both users and researchers thrive. Leo, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Adrian. And thank you for that. That's a better intro than I could ever have given myself. So thank you so much for that.
We like to ask my friend ChatGPT what she
Uh-oh.
thinks, and she comes up with amazing things.
Well, I totally agree. I would never do it without it at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least a gut check, right?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So, Leo, my audience it's the full spectrum. Okay. So it is people who are like, do I want to get into UX? Usually UX and design, right? Or I'm sorry, research and design. Others that are like, they've been doing this a long time and they're really trying to figure out what's next for them. Okay. So we have the whole gamut. So I may ask you a couple of questions, like explain that for the audience or whatever. But can we start with, how did you get into user experience research?
Yes, absolutely. And I've come to find out my story is not all that unique. There are others who have kind of taken a similar path, but my first career was in academia. My goal was to become an academic, and I went and made the crazy decision to get a PhD. My particular field was English and critical theory, and my plan was to pursue that. I loved the idea of academia. Both my parents were college professors. I watched them hang out all summer. It looked pretty awesome. But I actually ended up doing once I finished my PhD, I ended up doing more academic administration, which is sort of like building programs and things like that. And that's really where I came into contact with UX for the first time, although I had no idea there was a name for it. So I was tasked to roll out this program for students that was, it was an e-portfolio, which was kind of like a digital website for students to help them kind of showcase their accomplishments and that kind of thing. And at first we rolled it out and it was like crickets. Nobody was doing anything. Students were suspicious of it. And of course they handed it off to me and they were like, Leo, what can you do with this thing? And that's really where UX for me started. Again, I had no idea there was a name for it, but the goal was to take this thing and build it out so that students would find it useful and then drive adoption for it. And I was lucky enough to be at Ohio State, where Liz Sanders, who's a sort of legendary design research leader, has been teaching for a very long time. And so I connected with her, and she was so generous in advising me and sort of giving me sort of a basic education in her office hours. And then I ended up taking her class, her grad level class. So I went back to school again, but it was so worth it. I learned so much. And that's really where my UX journey launched from there. From there, I started to get very connected to the startup community in Columbus, Ohio. Major shout out to Columbus here. An incredible place for startups, and also an incredible place for research. It used to be called Test City USA because it was very commonly used as a test market. Not a ton of people know this now, but it was kind of like the place where real UX and market research was kind of born in some ways. That might be a little bold, but it was definitely an important test market for a lot of companies, and ended up being this great great startup ecosystem. So I just started to get connected to startups who kind of needed that little bit of research help. And I worked on the weirdest combination of projects. I can go into them if you want or pull out an example, but they were so odd and weird. And I loved every single one precisely because they were weird. And by weird, I think I mean totally unexpected. I never imagined I'd be working on anything like this, but it was exciting. And it sort of lit a fire for me and just got me going. And from there, I did, pretty brief stint working at Samsung. And then I was lucky enough to get connected to Beam, which was at that point sort of a developing startup in Columbus that had already gotten a ton of traction and was sort of an important component, was like a pillar of the startup ecosystem in Columbus, I would say.
Okay, so because you said it, right now we have to know, give us an example of one of the weird products or experiences that you tested.
Okay. I worked with a marketing consultant who needed research for a client who was building basically it was a way to give hairstylists an easy and simple website for them to use to promote their business.
Okay.
This guy was a one-person operation. He was a developer who was just building it himself. I guess he got the hunch that this was going to be a thing. And so they wanted us to go out and basically test it with some hairstylists. And I tried calling up and saying, hello, I'd like to book an appointment. And they'd be like, yes, what kind of hairstyle do you want? And I'd be like, no, it's for research, actually. Click.
Right.
So I realized it had to be guerrilla research. I had to show up in person and just see what would happen. And I'm pretty introverted. So realizing I had to do that, I was like, wow, this is going to be interesting. But I did it. And it was honestly, it was thrilling to me. And the best part was this founder didn't really have a sense of who his product was going to appeal to and why or how and what features it would really need to appeal to that group. And I literally found him product market fit by walking down this city blocks from salon to salon. Okay, big salon, absolutely not. They pay hundreds of dollars a month for software. Medium size, not so much. It ended up being individual stylists who were trying to build a name for themselves, who worked out of the back of somebody else's salon. And I'm convinced we could only really discover this by this extensive process of trial and error. But as one of my first projects, this was absolutely thrilling.
What I love about that is a couple things. One, there's a site that's there's an app that does that now. And I'm like, is it the same thing? But I'll ask you off camera. The next thing, though, is I don't think people realize the benefit of user research from that exploratory market fit. Like, hey, people that you think you want, that's not who you need to be targeting. So I love that. So was that particular client receptive? Were they shocked? How did they receive that?
They were very receptive. I wouldn't say shocked. I think he kind of anticipated that there would be some changes, or that maybe he didn't have it right up front. So he was really receptive. I think the part that surprised him was these individual stylists said, for this to work for me, it needs to have a booking function. And it didn't have one at the time. And so I think he took that and was like, okay, if that's what I have to do, that's what I have to do. I knew he was onto something because more than one person said, can I buy this now? Thought I was a salesperson and was ready to put the credit card down. And I know that there's a lot of in the field, there's a lot of sort of criticism of well, is that really the way to find, can you achieve product market fit by doing research interviews? And I would say in certain contexts, absolutely. If a person is like, can I buy this from you now? That's pretty strong signal. And so I was able to take that back and say, hey, they were putting a credit card in my face. Yeah.
The other thing that I want to add, since we have the space, right, is the plug that in those, and you can tell me if it was the same for you, you get to learn the words that they use and what they would Google, right, and what they would be looking for, right, so that you're making sure that you're targeting or speaking to them with your content. So can't miss the opportunity. Okay.
Absolutely. Right. Yeah. It's like a cultural alignment that can happen. And this guy was I don't think he had any experience, direct experience with a hairstyle or a hair salon. So the research actually helped him kind of get that cultural knowledge that he needed. Yeah, for sure.
That's good. We're gonna use that word. We're gonna borrow that. Okay. Let's talk about Beam benefits. So, what is Beam benefits, and what does your team do?
So Beam started in dental insurance and decided to make the transition to offer a wider array of products. And so that includes kind of all of the insurance lines that a business might need. Beam focuses on the small business market, typically under 100 lives. That's the lingo. Speaking of cultural vocabulary, that's the lingo used in the insurance industry, lives, but focuses in the small business space. And the reason for this is that the larger insurance carriers have typically kind of neglected the smaller business space. So there's a lot more money to be made from a 50,000 employee company, obviously, than a 10 employee company. But, seeing an opportunity in the market, Beam wisely, I think, decided to put the focus there. And, employee benefits is kind of it's a fascinating space. Benefits are really important for companies for a number of reasons. To attract talent, to retain talent, benefits need to remain competitive. From a research standpoint, really fascinating to see that during the pandemic, benefits took off. Employers started to have a much harder time retaining employees, and the first thing they did, increasing salary was going to be really tricky, but the first thing they did was say, what can we do about our benefits to help keep our employees or attract new ones? So you actually started to see restaurants, bars, other companies, types of businesses that weren't traditionally offering benefits were suddenly beating down the door of insurance companies and saying, we want everything. Give us everything.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
And I'm always fascinated by the things that happened during COVID or because of COVID that we didn't think of. I had no idea. Okay. All right. So then tell us about your team. Like, what types of research are y'all doing?
So we definitely evolved over a period of time. When I started, it was kind of, we had a CTO at that point running the show. And so there was a lot of focus on, obviously, on the software and building, highly usable experiences. So we did a ton of usability. But in the course of the business evolving so quickly over a few years, from offering one or two products, with dental and vision, to a whole suite, the research function definitely had to evolve as well. And so the phrase mixed methods is put out there a lot, but we genuinely became a mixed methods operation because the kinds of projects we were doing absolutely necessitated looking at both data and also digging deep into the experience of individuals. And when I say mixed methods, there's a mixed methods where it's like they're kind of talking to each other from across the room. The version that we've been doing more recently is like they're intertwined fundamentally, and that they're really speaking to each other. This is weird. I don't know what to do with this, but anyway, I'm a visual person, so the mixed method, it's sort of been a necessity based on the types of projects and questions that we've been asked to answer.
So I put out a job rec a couple of months ago for a mixed method researcher, and it was very clear to me that a lot of people didn't know what that means. So can you give us a high level definition of what a mixed method researcher does? How is that different than like a traditional qual or quant researcher?
Sure, yeah. So mixed methods typically, gosh, I was going to go with a metaphor first, where I was like, there's a sandwich where the parts remain sort of separate. And then that's where the metaphor is totally falling apart. You're baking a cake and you're mixing the ingredients together. I don't know. We can just delete that part.
Yeah, we're good. Or keep it to be fun. No, we're good.
No, I'm fine with it. But so mixed methods are where obviously you're using multiple methods, and typically there are methods of different types that are being used to answer and engage with the same research questions, but from different angles. That's a very basic kind of definition. There are many different types of mixed methods research, depending on, there's sequential mixed methods where you're doing different methods in order, perhaps on the same population, so that you're learning about that same population using different methods. There's doing sort of like, I forgot the exact terminology, but sort of synchronous mixed methods where you're doing two methods at the exact same time, perhaps on a different population. So there's a lot of different ways to position the different methods in relation to what you're trying to study. But I think that the key is sort of the methods are supplementing each other, or the output of the methods is supplementing each other in some way, where they're working together rather than just being two completely different things that you use separately, if that makes sense.
Okay. No, that's very, very helpful. I think that would be a really good way for people to think about it. So I told you I would do a bunch of internet stalking, and I did. And one of the things that caught me just on your LinkedIn page was around what you called strategy level research, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like based on some conversations that I've been hearing lately, some of the newer researchers, kind of that mid career, are hesitant to do kind of like that strategy work, right? Like they don't want to take that risk. Okay. So can you share a little bit about what strategy level research means to you, right? And then how does that show up in your research?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question based on some really excellent stalking.
It's my favorite part. It's my favorite part. Yeah.
No, that's a fantastic question. So strategy level, and strategy is a word that's been thrown around a lot in the last few years, especially. And I'm not a snob about it. I'm not like, oh, this person says strategy. And strategy, as a brilliant chief product officer I worked for a number of years, put it, strategy is basically deciding to do this instead of this. That helped boil down all the nonsense for me mentally. You can make strategy decisions at any level. So that's one thing to clarify up front first. It's you can have a strategy at the level of an individual design. You can have a strategy at the level of a product, and then you can have a strategy at the level of the business. That's roughly how I've thought about it over the years. You can have a strategy about choosing where to go to dinner tonight. I mean, a strategy, it can be a small word, a word that's covering a smaller decision, or a word that's covering an enormous decision. So the reason I like to think about it on those levels is it helps researchers decide or figure out, okay, where am I working right now? What level of decision am I informing, really? My own experience with it is, and my conviction is, UX research is most valuable when it's helping at the highest level, at the business level, meaning it's helping the business make decisions to do this rather than this. And businesses are faced with those decisions, big and small, all the time. And sometimes you have to make them so quickly that leaders are just like, well, this is our gut, or this is the evidence we have right now. And the great thing that UX research can do is actually provide up to the minute solid evidence to inform those decisions. So for my money, UX research it achieves the most value when it's allowed, sort of a keyword, to play at that high level. And when leaders recognize how it can help them. I believe that any UX researcher who's thinking about doing, like, how is my work aiding in strategy, that it would behoove them to put themselves at the table as much as possible to show how their work can inform those decisions. And it might be good to start small, but that to me is the best way and this is sort of the moment too that calling it UX research sometimes can limit it, because it's like the work we do sometimes can have an impact beyond what is strictly called user experience. And I think a lot of companies are recognizing that, but the name hasn't quite caught up yet.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you tell that researcher that is apprehensive about taking that position or that role or that stand based on their research?
I mean, the first step there for me is always to ask yourself or ask a mentor or somebody close to you, why? What's the source of the apprehension? Because in an ideal world as a researcher, you want to be in a position where you have the confidence to do it and you have the rigor in your work, that you feel confident about what you're going to be sharing with leadership. You want to handle those things the bigger problem is actually convincing the people who are making the decisions to listen to you. But first, I think and not to get too into psychology here, but like first, I think you have to kind of take that on yourself. And that's where I think mentors can be really important, people senior to you. They don't need to be like senior researchers. A lot of us are, working at a company, we're the only researcher, but they can be somebody like a strategic partner, a PM who believes in your work, um, any partner who sees value in what you do to help you sort of build that confidence and get to that point where let's maybe start it like on a visual, like the foundation is that your work is reliable. That survey you did was done properly. We can rely on the methods. You are reporting on things like margin of error. You understand all that stuff. You understand that the sample was done properly, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have any questions there. Because if you have questions there, don't take it,
Yeah.
don't take
Yeah.
it up a level and then try to convince somebody, because then it all collapses. So the
Yeah.
foundation is absolutely like, you feel confident in the methods you're using. You feel confident that you believe your company should be relying on the work you're doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely, base of the pyramid. From there, it's getting sort of advocates or partners to help you as you're building the confidence to speak this truth that you've discovered. To help you do that effectively. And then I think maybe the top of the pyramid is learning to have those conversations with leadership yourself. So you are showing up in front of the C-suite and you're presenting and you're getting grilled and you're okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
And they can say
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of things like the famous, like, I don't believe this is statistically significant. And you're like, what?
Um, no, that's very helpful. Thinking about how do we want to do this? Let's do this one. So, how do you, in your research, one of the things that I guess when I started to grow, I found challenging was bouncing back and forth between strategy and like being in the weeds. So, how do you do that? How do you balance that?
Hmm. Ooh, another great one. I mean, it's tough if you have a job where you kind of have no choice. Uh, I think that if you have a team or bigger team, you have the ability to kind of maybe try to deliberately step away and uh, empower your team members to do some of that work that is in the weeds. And it's not in the weeds we're not talking busy work. We're just talking about in the weeds in terms of doing research, to empower them as much as possible to take that over. I think it's a huge challenge. It's a challenge that I've faced. You know, Part of it comes from passion. You're like, oh, I see a million ways we can improve that. Like, let's go do that. And you really have to let go to some degree. But your question was more about like, how do you switch between the levels? Um,
Yeah, but how do you go back and forth between strategy and being in the weeds, right? Because sometimes, like you said, you may not have multiple people, so that one person is having to do both.
yeah, I think you can go into the weeds and keep that strategic mindset intact and see opportunities when you're in the weeds. And I can give a really concrete example of that. Something as small as like testing content for marketing or a test of a prototype. I would argue that those are huge opportunities for strategic learning that are sometimes overlooked, especially if you're more hierarchical and you tend to say, oh, well, the junior researchers will do that nonsense and we're up here doing our strategy work, whatever that means. Sometimes you find absolute gold in something as small as like a prototype test. You'll learn something about this set of customers that you hadn't quite been able to put into words before. And so I think that maybe this is an answer to your question, but like keeping that mindset, even if you're in the weeds, can be hugely powerful, because you're taking full advantage of this research that you might not regard as like strategy research, strictly speaking, but most research can contribute to strategy if you just pay attention to what's happening in it, or if you just really squeeze it for all it's worth.
Yeah. And see the big picture, right? Like know what it's connected to and having the context of the business itself.
Right.
Okay, so I always find it fascinating when researchers come from academia. Was it weird for you when you went from academia to business research and the space? Was that different? How was that for you?
It was very weird. There's this in the academic world, there's this kind of like bias against like for profit and, like, oh gosh, they're doing it for money. Um, what can I say? So I was,
Kind of how we pay bills. Kind of a little bit.
yeah, I was a little like, oh gosh, what is this going to be like? And I wasn't in the academic world my whole life. My first job out of college was at a major law firm. So I saw like money making up close, let's just say. Well, not actually counting the bills, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't totally foreign to me, but I think like getting really plugged into a business, it was kind of like, whoa, it's a very different way of thinking. Like in the academic world, there's very little accountability. It's like you do whatever the heck you want for the most part, and there's very little oversight compared to the private sector. So getting used to that part, but it's a trade-off because there's little accountability in the academic world, but also to a large degree, nobody cares what you're doing. So whereas in the private sector, doing the kind of research that you and I do, people do care. They tend to care. They're paying for it. It impacts their business. They want to know yesterday, what you learned. Whereas, in academia, it's kind of like, oh, you've been working on that book for 10 years. Okay, great. Great. Well, we look for much longer is it going to take? Oh, another 10 years. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And that's okay. I'll just read it chapter by chapter, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Fine.
you're
Yeah,
right.
just send it to me. So it was an adjustment in there were some tough things, but then there were also like big rewards. So I think that, yeah, that was definitely one aspect. I personally, like, I've sort of known about myself that I like the kind of faster pace, and the pace at universities it can be painfully slow. I think everybody kind of knows that. But it's true. Very slow to adapt to things, to change. New ideas kind of creep along, and I wouldn't throw Ohio State under the bus at all. Ohio State has a number of different, number of great examples of like being innovative, investing in innovation. But even then, you're not a startup. A startup is like, hey, we're going to be offering 5 new products next year,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's June. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so I kind of I like that. I knew I would kind of like that pace, and it turned out to be true. Yeah.
I love that. How long did it take you to realize you couldn't write as much for the business as you did?
Oh,
You gotta take all that
spot on.
methodology stuff and move it to the back. They don't care. How long did that take you?
I was today years old when I learned that. It honestly, it's still a battle. There are a couple of I think really good influencer or social media personalities who have like really talked me out of some of that old way of thinking. But the idea of like, do not show your work, present the conclusions, is completely the reverse of how it typically works in academia, or at least the version that I was in, where it's like it's all about the sort of build up to the conclusion and the fleshing out of all the detail. That's really how you get rewarded. Flipping that completely and going, wait, I'm going to have just one slide where I say like the upshot of all of this, and that's the only one they're going to read. Like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah,
But there's something refreshing there too, because in the academic world, you sit through these like half an hour conference papers and things where people are literally reading from the paper it's wild. And so much of that can just wash over you. So like in some ways, academics would benefit from the way of thinking where it's like being punchier wouldn't necessarily hurt, but it's just a very different world. So it has taken me a long time to make that adjustment for sure.
My brother, he's an overachiever, definitely, and he is finishing up his second doctorate. And
Oh,
so I
one
had
is
a,
not enough.
yeah, I said, please just, can we just take a break from school? Okay, but anyway, but I got the chance to watch him defend his dissertation a couple months ago.
Wow.
And I thought design critiques were tough. I was like the big sister in me was like, I need stop picking on my brother. But he handled it well. So I think if I look at like academia, I think that's one of the things that I would probably want to pull into how we do research, right? Spending a little bit more time sifting at that research level, right? But the speed of business gets in the way. But I that was interesting. I had never seen that before. Okay. So now, thinking about you, Leo, your career, what is one thing you wish you had learned sooner?
Huh, that's a great one. Wow. Gosh. So there are so many things that I would even have trouble to kind of settle on one. I definitely wish that I had been exposed to more of the quantitative side of things earlier, and that I'd been pushed to do it. I even wish that I had been exposed to that while I was still in the world of academia and higher education. Um, but my work didn't take me there until a pretty late stage where I you started to get involved in like assessment type stuff and learned surveys properly, like from an academic perspective. But I wish it had been sooner. I wish I had been exposed to that much sooner. That is becoming an increasingly important part of the work that we all do, and I fully embrace it. I think it's a good thing, but I would have liked to have dug in many years ago, so that I had more of like a base and didn't have to build it, because it's a tough thing to pick up in your spare time and on the job.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thinking about you or kind of the future of UX in general, UX research, but specifically leaders, what are some opportunities that you see for research leaders, you know, as we move forward?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think that research leaders, I think we would have wanted to believe that our work is done in terms of advocacy for the importance of the work that we do. But the truth is, it's never done, and there are a lot of signs that it's not done, and that we need to keep doing it. And I think that a leader's role is to take that on themselves in a real way. And there's no boilerplate way to do it, I don't think. I think that it depends on where you are, what's happening there, what's important, and understanding kind of how your specific team, whether you have one team beneath you or multiple ones, how they stand to contribute the most value to that particular business. That to me is like, that's what I mean by advocacy. I don't mean just thought leadership on LinkedIn. I mean, plugging in your team so that it's contributing the most value it can possibly contribute in that context. Um, and I think that that will mean very different things at different businesses, and I think it's also what makes it a little harder to say that there's sort of like this monolith of UX research. It's like a giant thing you plug in at any company. I really don't think that's the case. And I think all the conversations I've had with peers prove to me that it's what it means to be an advocate for research is very different from one company to the next. So I think the task of the leader is to figure out what is that? what is that value, and how do I communicate? How do I not only communicate it? How do we do it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's my favorite question that I get from people. Like, when do I have to stop fighting the fight? Never.
Yeah,
That step one. We will be doing this forever, if for no other reason. One, people change constantly, right? We're meeting people all the time who somehow miss that, and I think that's going to decline. Um, I don't know what's worse, a person who knows nothing or a person who learned a little bit. I'm not sure, but either way, we have to deal with both, right? And then there is and I say this because I want people to be mindful. We're all trying to go the same way, but we have different motivations, right?
yep.
And sometimes their motivation is different than ours, and it's easy to forget some of the other things, right? So then we're going to have to still come back and say, yeah, I know we needed that out yesterday, but none of that stuff works and it doesn't make sense, right? And it's just kind of balancing that.
Yeah.
um okay, so let's see. One, I think I told you I'm a huge fan of your writing, so now it makes sense that you were like an English major and like you're just full of words
Oh,
constantly.
oh yeah.
So, and you write a lot of content, a lot of content. So, like, is there a strategy? Is there a reason we write so much content? Is it just like burning in your soul? What is the motivation there? And when do you find the time?
Whoa. You're asking about what's the secret sauce. No, I mean, those are all great questions. You know, I started doing it because it was kind of like a test for myself. Like, what have you learned? Like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I faced this in grad school big time. And I'm sure that a lot of other people, you face this in any context, like the terror of the blank page and looking at like, um, and maybe that's paired with some imposter syndrome. Like, what do I know? Do I know anything? Have I learned anything in all this time? Or have I just been, in the weeds doing these things? And I think to me, it was like, give it a try, start writing things down. And at first I didn't necessarily have a plan on what to do and where to put all this stuff. But I started this like probably over a year ago. And the first thing I did was write a couple what I thought would be Medium articles. And it quickly turned into, I was like, these are either too big or too small. It was a bit of a Goldilocks situation there. And I was like, I haven't been that active on LinkedIn. And I really admire the people. And I've learned a lot from people who will put out those little nuggets. And so I was like, fine, I'll just do it. In my very first post, of all things, it was on the importance of thinking about theory in research. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't know if other people are going to care as much about this as I do. And it got a pretty warm response, which was very encouraging to me. And I was like, okay, that sort of broke the seal in a certain way, because it was like, oh, all right. I wasn't like viciously attacked. I did have one strong dissenter, and it was actually enjoyable to engage in the back and forth. Um, but yeah, I from there I just decided to keep going, and I'll tell you, I hit a fork in the road pretty quickly. Obviously, there's a huge temptation to use AI tools to do this stuff, and I will occasionally use them to like help bolster. And one thing they're really great for is like, hey, I just wrote this first sentence. It sounds pretty dull and academic. Like, can you help me tune this a bit to make it appeal to people? And AI is great for that. Um, I don't think there's a first sentence out there that I actually wrote. Just putting that out there. Um, but here, the key thing for me is I realized if you rely on AI for your ideas, it feels to me that it just doesn't feel like what I want to do. What my whole thing is just basically, I want to put the things out that I personally have learned and can attest to. And sometimes those are going to be more flawed and weird than you'd find from AI. But I can tell you that they're true from my own experience. They worked for me. They're things that I've noticed, and they're things that I think will be valuable to at least a few other people. So that's kind of what keeps me going. In terms of finding the time, it's definitely tough. I've just settled on, there are people who post like crazy. I'll never get there. At this point, it's got to come from me is my rule, ultimately. So like, I'm just going to go for whatever happens to come out. If I feel like it's valuable, then I'm going to post it. I don't want to just end up posting just to post. That is a strong temptation, by the way.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. What I was telling my team, as I told you earlier, I was telling my team, yeah, go follow this guy. I was like, because your content is digestible, right? So it's not like I don't feel. This is where I am. I do most things from my phone. Okay, that's full disclosure. Most things from my phone. So I love that I can like scroll through. I can read it. I can get the content. I don't feel like, oh, I need to go get my glasses, right? Like it's just let me sit here. So I appreciate that. So here's my thank you to you for all of your wonderful content. Now, the last time we spoke, you told me you were up to something. So I want you to now tell the audience what you've been up to, because I think it's a brilliant idea. Let me tell you one other thing that I love about this is so the people who've been listening to my podcast, they've heard me say at some point, some of us will have to choose to do something different, right? And we will have to exercise our skills in a different way. And you've done just that. So let's talk about what you've been up to.
yes. So one of the things I noticed when I first started down this road was there's a bit of an education gap in this field. So having the experience of being trained as an academic researcher and an administrator too, where you end up doing research, I had a certain set of skills I pre-installed. But the first thing I noticed when I started on the job was, oh my God, there's so much to learn that none of my previous experience prepared me for. And over those years of doing the job, I observed, of course, referred to my own experience. I attended every webinar you could possibly imagine, especially during the pandemic. I mean, I think I was unshowered, hadn't brushed my teeth, and attended 3 webinars already that day. So definitely a lot of absorbed stuff that way. But I observed on my own team, on the team that I built, a lot of the same, just trying to hack an education together, from if you're lucky enough to have a mentor. In some cases, people will pay a mentor to learn certain things. So from the very get-go, especially as an educator, having come from a gigantic state university that literally where you can learn to do anything from fly an airplane to be a zookeeper, A to Z. See what I did there?
I see what you did there. I see it.
So you can learn literally everything from A to Z. It surprised me. And so I think I marinated on that for a while, and over the last year, especially started to invest more into thinking about what can we do about this. And there are already some great organizations out there that I think do great at covering, conferences and webinars and that kind of thing. But the kind of education I and my team believes that UX researchers need is courses. And we believe that courses are an essential way to learn some of the skills that researchers definitely need, because research let's not get into the game of percentages, but let's say it's half knowledge or theory and half skills. And a skill is something that you can't memorize. You have to practice it. And a lot of the existing education out there covers one side or the other side. So there's a ton of on-the-job learning that happens in UX research. But the trouble with on-the-job learning is you typically don't get a lot of the theory and a lot of the knowledge. So we are, and this long intro I'll come out with. So we are calling ourselves the UXR Institute, and our goal is to provide courses, live online courses that enable UX researchers to build advanced skills. So we are building for UX researchers who are beyond the early stage in their career. So we're not intending to provide the absolute bare bones basics, But we're sort of, you mentioned a sort of stage earlier of researchers who are kind of looking at, well, what's next? Where do I go from here? What do I need to advance my career? Those are our people. And we believe that courses are actually the fastest and most efficient way for anyone to learn both the theory that they'll need and to build the skills that they need in order to actually do these things on the job.
Okay, so I was looking at it. Looks like you have some courses starting in October. So how are these structured?
So the courses are all live and online. Some people would call this cohort based, it is, but I always think that that doesn't mean anything to people. So they're structured in a way that will bring students, these particular two courses, one of them is, so they're both on the quantitative side. And we're calling them, they're both under the course category of Foundations of Quantitative UX Research. So they're neither of them presumes any kind of experience or knowledge, but they each teach. One of them teaches survey design, and the other one teaches what we're calling statistical methods for product development. And so both of these courses, and this is just our starting point. These are the first two offerings we're putting out there in the world. Both of these courses enable a person to start from zero, and we take them to one. So what that means, for example, is you would, for our survey design course, you would start with, maybe you've been doing surveys for a while, but you don't have any real grounding in the methodology. We'll take you there. Same thing with the statistical methods course. No, I mean, maybe some basic math is required, but we recognize there are a lot of researchers out there who are increasingly being asked to do quantitative work, or quantitative work is becoming necessary for their advancement to another level or to another job. Yeah. And this is the kind of course that can help them get that foundational knowledge that they need in order to start doing some of the actual quantitative work that mixed methods or quantitative researchers do.
Okay. So I'm going to show the site so they can see it. I'll give them all contact information because I think it's really cool, and I'd love to see. One, I appreciate that you're filling that gap because, like you said, a lot of times when it comes to skills, you feel like you're trying to build the plane, right? Yep. While you're on it. And so this is an opportunity for them to learn those skills. That's pretty cool.
I'm so glad that you brought up the plane metaphor too, because I like to make the analogy of like, research it's a specialized activity, like flying a plane, like being a pilot, like being a surgeon. Maybe not quite so much riding on it, but as those two examples, but there are big, important business decisions that we want to be riding in research. And it's really important. We would want our pilots and our surgeons to have both the theory and the skills. And we want the same for researchers, because again, it's about building that foundation that you need in order to then have the confidence to inform strategy.
Absolutely. All right, so I want to be mindful of the time. Before I let you go, I hate that this conversation is ending, but before I let you go, is there anything else you would like to leave with the audience?
Gosh, I mean, I would mention about the UXR Institute. We are not a closed group of people. We are open. We are trying to build a community. So we would love to have people propose courses to teach. We do have a bit of a sort of loosely structured curriculum to work within. But we would be absolutely thrilled to welcome anybody who has some experience, has something they would like to share in the format of a course. We provide support for course development, guidance throughout. We don't believe any teaching experience is necessary. We're a group of people who has a lot of it already, and we have a lot to share in terms of support. UXRinstitute.com.
So what I think I heard you say is that if you have something you want to teach,
yes,
they should also come to you. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, perfect. Well, Leo, thank you so much for making the time to hang out with me today. This was fun. We knew it would be.
Thank you.
And I'll make sure I share all of everybody needs to go follow your LinkedIn page and then go check out UXR Institute.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. You're a delightful host. This was an absolute blast.
Thank you so much. All right.